Welcome to the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, a podcast about a journey of discovery and conversations about not sitting on the sideline of life. Let's get involved. Here's host Joe
Today on the No
Foley.
Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, my guest, Jason Earl. Jason's a man on a mission, adoring father, and also the founder CEO of 1-800-GOT MOLD. And he's a creator of Got Mold Test Kit. He's been appeared on shows like Good Morning America, Extreme Makeovers, Dr. Oz. He's a man on a mission to help people with help their health by helping them take action and getting rid of mold. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thank you, Joe. Good to be here.
You know what's funny? And I like the intro questions. It's kind of fun, actually. And you said a Guinness record, and that I think that's a good way to start off.
Yeah, I mean that was an accident that when I look back at it now, it seems somewhat hard to believe still, even to this day. So I am 45 now. I happened to when I was let me see. Where do I begin on this one? So I had a series of challenging events happen starting around the age of 13. I mean, quite frankly, my childhood in general had its challenges. My parents had a very tumultuous relationship, and there was a lot of booze, a lot of alcoholism, and all that stuff. So it was very dysfunctional. And my parents separated when I was about 12, and I'll get back to that because it gets into how I got into the mold industry. But at 14, my mom committed suicide. And then a year later, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. And really the Lyme, the symptoms were relatively mild. And then the antibiotics came in. And the antibiotics just wrecked me. It's like 30 pills a day for 3 days on and 3 days off. And it was this thing called like pulse therapy. And it was just debilitating. I missed a ton of school, and I was already a recalcitrant teenager. And so I really didn't want to be there anyway. But they called me into the office, and it was January of my junior year, and they told me that I had violated the attendance policy. And of course, there was no written attendance policy. They really wanted me to make a decision, and essentially they said that I was going to have to either stay and continue the year and finish the year, and then come back and repeat my junior year, or otherwise drop out. Long story short, I ended up being basically forced to drop out, and I ended up taking a job at the gas station, which I was already working part-time. I took full-time hours there. And while I was working, I was really enjoying it. I'd actually convinced my father to sign me out because I told him that I was going to buck the system, get my GED, start college a year early, and revenge with success, essentially, And so the bottom line is, I pitched the gas station owner the same thing, and she gave me a full-time hour so I could save money for college. But while I was there, within about 2 months of my full-time position, a guy came in with a flat tire on his BMW, and he was in a big rush, and he told me he wanted me to put some air in his tire. And I said, well, listen, if I fill with air, it'll be flat again in a few minutes, shortly thereafter. So if you give me a few minutes, I can maybe patch it for you. And he's like, if you could do it quickly, there's money in it for you. So I said, okay. So he pulls around to where the air pump was, and I could see the nail sticking out. So I patched it and filled it with air and said $5, and he slapped some cash in my hand and drove away. And I looked at my hand; it was a $50 bill. So, and at the time, I was 16. I thought he'd made a mistake, and so I figured he was going to come back, but he did not come back. In fact, 2 weeks later, I saw him for the first time, and I approached him and I said, "Hey, Mister, I don't know if you remember me, but I was the kid that fixed your tire." He's like, "Yeah, kid, Jason." He remembered my name, which was amazing. I mean, it's like the first rule in when friends influence people, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, he ended up saying, "Hey, listen, kid, you did me a solid." And I said, "I feel like I owe you a favor." Or, I said, "First of all, I feel like did you make a mistake?" He's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "It was a $5 repair." He said, "He gave me a 50." He goes, "I didn't have 100." And so I said, "Listen, I feel like I owe you a favor." He goes, "No, if anything, I owe you a favor." And I said, what do you do for a living?" He said, "I work on Wall Street." And I said, "Well, how about get me a job?" And he said, "Call me by 9 a.m. tomorrow, or don't ever bother calling me at all." So he said, "Grab a pen." So I started writing down my number on his number on my hand because I didn't have a piece of paper. And he started laughing. And he goes, "You're going to fit right in." He rolled up his sleeve. He had stock quotes written all over his arm. And so I went home and I told my father what happened, and he couldn't believe it, but he said, "You better call him." So I did. And 9 a.m. I called him up and and we went through an exchange that was pretty memorable. He said, "What are you doing today?" I said, "Going to work." He said, "Where?" And I said, "Gas station." He's like, "Wrong answer, kid." And I said, "All right, can we do that again?" He said, "Yep." He said, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "Going to work." He said, "Where?" And I said, "What's your address?" And he said, 88 Pine Street, 10th floor. And click. So I was like, wow. I called in sick. I called into work and said, I've got an opportunity here that I need to pursue. And I put on my finest pair of jeans for my Wall Street interview. Borrowed some a button-down shirt from my father, and flip-flopped my way up to Wall Street. We lived in a little town outside of Princeton, about an hour away by train. And lo and behold, he gave me an opportunity. He took me under his wing and he trained me. And he made me his protege. And there's a long story attached to that, but I ended up accidentally becoming the youngest licensed stockbroker in history. And that's where I got the Guinness World Record at 17 years old. And I totally didn't even realize at the time, because there were a lot of other younger people there, but I was the youngest for sure. So that's how that all happened. And from there, I mean, really, I did that for 9 years. I had a really great career, and I left when the dot-com bubble burst, and I owned my own firm for a couple of years. But I always struggled with purpose, Joe. The biggest issue with Wall Street for me was I was raised with the idea that your effort should contribute to the greater good. My mom was a nurse, and she was the director of nursing at a rehab center, and I was encouraged to volunteer and on weekends and things like that. And so it was we had a service-oriented household. At least I was encouraged to think that way. We had rescued animals all the time, and that was a big part of my childhood. And that's something I hope to impress upon my two boys, is that perpetual attention to the needs of others. Really, not at your own expense, but really as a way to contribute to the richness of others, and to help alleviate suffering whenever possible. So, in any case, that was a real struggle for me on Wall Street. And so when the dot-com bubble burst, I decided to go on walkabout, and I took about a year and a half off and backpacked around. It was right after September 11th, so I wasn't able to go very far. I took trains across Canada, and I ended up taking a flying to Hawaii, where I was spending quite a bit of time reading local papers. And in one of the local papers, there was a story about a big mold problem in one of the hotels on Oahu that had been shut down for this mold problem, which turned out to be the biggest mold problem in history at the time, with a $55 million total cost. It was a massive, massive mold. They stripped the entire building. It was and so the story that caught my attention, though, Joe, was a guy who got sick. He was in his 40s. He'd been otherwise healthy, but due to what he claimed to be mold exposure. And this is one of the first cases that's the first time I'd ever heard about this, but apparently it was one of the first big cases that was really publicized. This guy developed adult onset asthma, which is something I'd never heard of, and also sensitivities to all these foods and things that he was previously, fine with. And it was like a deja vu moment for me, because that's how I grew up. When I was 4 years old, falsely diagnosed with cystic fibrosis and sick, allergic to everything. And then when my folks split up and I moved out of the house, all my symptoms went away. And so for me, it was like the light bulb went on, and that's what brings it full circle.
It was interesting talking about that. When I was finding a 17-year-old kid, a guy could give you $50, and back then we're about the same age. I would be very suspicious of that person.
Well, first of all, I was suspicious of. I wasn't so suspicious of him, because he had a way about him. What was remarkable to me was that my father wasn't more suspicious of this, because here, what's this guy want to do with it? High school gas jockey, high school dropout. I was, nothing. There's nothing impressive about me then or now. I mean, honestly, I've got some experiences that are worthwhile that I can, that make me useful. But otherwise, there was nothing to pick me out of a gas station, right? Nothing remarkable. So my father's lack of concern sometimes makes me laugh. But he recognized that I didn't have a lot of options. At that point, I was a legitimate high school dropout. My mom had just died. I was suffering from a lot of physical issues. I was still having a really hard time with all that. I struggled for a long time with digestive issues from the antibiotics, where if I eat a bagel, I'd have out-of-body experiences for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I don't eat. I have a ketogenic diet, and that completely cleared that up. But yeah, that skepticism is something that I've actually talked to my father about, and he said point blank, he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" That was one big door for you, all you had to do was walk through it.
Well, it's interesting you say that too. I found that fascinating too, in the sense that sometimes people don't realize when the door is there and they don't jump through the door and take that chance, because they're like, maybe like you get an email going, hey, if you just sign up now, you'll get this with this, or you take this chance, call this number. And I'm like, that's a prank, or they're going to steal my password.
But you know what's funny? When I showed up to Randy's office the first day, he said, "Buddy, you showed up," and I said, "Of course I did." My parents taught me, show up, do what you say you're going to do. That was like, just show up and do what you say you're going to do. It's fundamental. If you do that, most things take care of themselves. And I said, "Of course I did." And he goes, "No, kid, you don't get it." And he said, "But because you showed up, 90% of success in life is showing up." And I was like, that sounds like something I'm familiar with. So I was indoctrinated with that idea, right? I mean, my parents didn't necessarily live up to that standard, but they certainly passed that along to me. And so, yeah, no, it was a remarkable turn of events. And I look back at it now with wonder, because also I in the 9 years that I was a broker, tried to recruit kids who I thought had promise. I would see them, would be at a gas station. One, in fact, was at a gas station, convenience stores, kids coming into my house to contractors, people who I just thought, you'd be really good if you just, and I gave out probably 100 business cards over the years. And you know how many kids called me? Like maybe 5 or 6. Nobody believed it. It was like too good to be true. And when I talked to Randy about that, the guy who recruited me, he said the same thing. He said people just never, the door wide open, right? And people didn't even pick up the phone. So
it's interesting too about that stuff. I always find that fascinating. And working on Wall Street, you're pretty busy. I always see the floor and all the tickets going everywhere, and people look really stressed out. And it must have helped you to become a new dad, because the first few years you're like, there's no sleep. So you probably used to that when doing the working on Wall Street. How has that prepared you as a father?
Well, that's actually a really interesting point. First of all, I think Wall Street prepared me for entrepreneurship, and then entrepreneurship prepared me for fatherhood. So the idea that, and actually, I quit drinking a few years ago, and in that process, developed a meditation practice. And what I realized was each one of these things prepared me for the next step, and quite frankly, opened me up to being able to deal with relative chaos in any situation. That's really what it comes down to, is the idea that I can't control the external circumstances, but I can control my reaction to them, and I can respond instead of react. Hence the term responsibility, as opposed to reactivity. And so to be responsible adult as opposed to a reactive, so is to respond in an appropriate way. And I think that being on Wall Street, where there's a tremendous amount of counterintuitive restraint that you need to have. You don't want to buy when it's high, but everybody wants, people want to chase stocks. Anyway, there's a ton of counterintuitive stuff. And so being a parent, I think in many ways is counterintuitive. I think a lot of the things that you want to do, you want to lean in and save things and be, but oftentimes the best thing to do is lean back and let them experience those things. And so I think, entrepreneurship is also similar, where, you have to learn how to create and cultivate talent, which means that you don't do stuff for people. You let them do it and learn, and those kinds of things. Allowing, it's very hard for me. I'm a control guy. I like to get in there and do it right. Move over, I'll show you. But being a good leader in business, and being able to deal with chaos from Wall Street, I think did help me deal with 2-year-olds.
Well, definitely. I can remember the time, oh man, I've had one of those. Have you ever had one of those father moments? Like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that kind of father moments.
Every day.
I can share one though. I mean,
please do.
I mean, by the time my son was about almost 1, I was still changing diapers, and I had him on, we had a bureau, and the diapers were kind of out of reach. I'm like, I mean, if I just stretched a little bit, I would have grabbed it. And I had my hand on 1 second. I'm like, I can let him off for a second. He rolled. As he rolled off the bureau. I grabbed him by both legs before his head hit the ground. And the next day I felt, I saved his life, obviously, and I was my quick reflexes, but man, that was one of my old dad moments. I'm like, I almost killed my son.
Well, yeah, when you say one of those oh dad moments, I look at it both ways. The OMG dad. Oh, wow. I can't believe I just did that. Celebrate that. I can't wait to tell Sarah about that. or, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. I better not tell Sarah about that.
we all have, as dads and fathers, we all have those kind of moments. And I can probably tell you many more, but we don't have enough time. But we have plenty of time, but not about that subject. But it's interesting. I brought you on tonight. Was talking about mold and how it affected your life as growing up. And I found it fascinating because you said you were cystic fibrosis. You were diagnosed with that, but it wasn't the correct diagnosis.
Yeah, when they brought me to the hospital, I was 4 years old. I'd lost 30% of my body weight in about a 3-week period, as I'm told. I was there, but my memory is kind of foggy. And and so they, as I'm told, it was pretty abrupt. And I was having difficulty breathing. And so the pediatrician said, actually, you should take him to Children's Hospital. So they took me directly to Children's Hospital, which was about an hour away, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is a renowned respiratory clinic for kids, respiratory hospital. It's like a respiratory mecca. Anyway, they brought me there, and the first diagnosis was cystic fibrosis, I think predominantly driven by my family history. My dad had 4 cousins who died of CF before the age of 14. And so they waited 6 weeks for a second opinion, which was that I didn't have cystic fibrosis, evidenced by the fact that I sit here at 45 years old, because back then that was really a death sentence. And rather, I had asthma compounded by pneumonia. And one of my early memories actually is being put in this papoose. It's like a straitjacket for toddlers. I wish I had one actually. For now, but they would expose your back and draw a grid and then put these antigens on your back and assess the response. And my dad said that I looked like a ladybug, big red dots all over, And so I was essentially allergic to everything that they tested me for. It was easier for them to tell me what I wasn't allergic to than rather what I was. And so it was grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, cotton, soybeans. And I grew up on a small non-working farm and where we were surrounded by grass, wheat, corn, dogs, cats, soybeans, everything. Cotton. I mean, my clothes were a source of great irritation, my sheets and things like that. And so it was challenging. But when I was, and I remember the basement being, a source of not discomfort, but feeling a little bit weird down there, maybe a little more of a weight on my chest. So I spent a lot of time outside and didn't really think about it at all. But it was funny when I was in Hawaii and I had this epiphany and I thought, geez, I wonder if mold had made me sick. What was the underlying cause? I called my dad from the payphone and talk about parenting. I called my father from the payphone, which probably isn't there anymore. I don't know how many payphones are there. And I said, listen, I just read the story about this guy who got sick from mold. Do you think my respiratory stuff as a kid was caused by that? And I said, do you think we had mold? Actually, I said, do you think we had mold? And he goes, Jason, we had mushrooms in the basement. Of course we had mold. he laughed at me. And I said, do you think it was causal? Do you think it's something that might have caused my illness? And he's like, well, it didn't help. But just to think, there wasn't even a resource for him. Even if he wanted to do something about it, there was really nothing that they were going to do. There wasn't an awareness. There was no internet to research these things. There was no such thing as a mold inspection company or a mold remediation company or a mold test kit or any of that stuff, right? Those resources were not available. And information didn't travel. That my parents were both smokers with an asthmatic kid, and they would smoke with the windows up in the car. And that was normal back then, right? I mean, there was just a whole different level of awareness that's, now they'd be brought up on charges for stuff like that. And they were just doing the best that they could.
It was like air quality. I remember my mom and my stepdad, they were smoking, they rolled the cars up. I can tell that, and this is pretty bad. You can tell that when the cigarette was kind of, not that good, not like it was moldy or something. You can tell after a while, you can tell the smell of it going, that's a bad cigarette. That's not a good one. You shouldn't be smoking that. But the air quality in the house and stuff like that with dust and everything. When I was younger, I used to have a lot of problem breathing. And my mom was notorious for smoking and thinking she can cover it up with potpourri. And that was like napalm. And then your eyes started watering and stuff like that going, all right, the air quality is horrible in here. There's so much dust. I get an allergy test and I'm allergic to everything known to mankind. And when it comes to allergy and dust mites and stuff like that, I move out and I live on my own. I'm like, I feel normal now. That's the different feeling.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Indoor air quality is, if you look at the statistics, they're kind of shocking. Very few people talk about this. But we spend 90% of our time indoors, and in extreme climates like Dubai or Canada, Northern Canada, people spend sometimes as much as 99% of the time indoors. And if you include transportation, the number's high. And we're so busy. Everyone's so busy talking about outdoor air quality and outdoor air pollution and all this stuff. And we have almost no control over you. Whatever you do, no matter how bad it is, no matter how much your car pollutes, you're barely going to make a dent in that thing. And if you stop polluting, you're still not going to make a dent in it. But your indoor air quality is a place where you have a lot of control. And the crazy part about it is that if you look at the statistics, mold and poor indoor air quality are the underlying causes of some of the most prevalent long-term illnesses in America. And I'm talking like chronic sinusitis, which is 37 million Americans, 11% of the population, is a mold issue, according to Mayo Clinic. 24.6 million cases of asthma in America, and about a quarter of those are mold and dampness related, according to the EPA and Berkeley labs, which is 4.6 million people. The numbers are just staggering. You add them all up between property damage and these illnesses, not to mention that there's correlations between mold and dampness indoors and depression, which is pretty fascinating. And there's interesting research that shows that the chemical compounds that make that musty odor actually do cause changes in brain chemistry, evidenced by some research done at Rutgers University with a friend of mine named Dr. Joan Bennett. And so she showed that fruit flies exposed to the musty odor actually stop making dopamine, and they stop reproducing, and they do all sorts of they develop Parkinson-like symptoms. And so there's some interesting research on exposure to mold and how it impacts our overall quality of life. But there's no doubt that it also affects you cognitively. So people live in a musty odor don't think well, they don't learn well, they tend to have emotional outbursts. Mold rage is an actual thing. And this is very poorly understood, and it's obviously not widely understood. And what's interesting about it is that we have also this dynamic that we're constantly rebreathing the same air. So if you have a pollutant in your house, even if it's a small one, you're constantly being re-exposed to it. And so it's very important that people take action when they find something, when they start to notice that there's any signs of dampness, any whether they be visual. So if you see something, smell something, or feel something, it's very important you take action, because your indoor environment impacts you probably as much as the food that you eat in terms of your overall health.
It's interesting too. I never thought about that, the air quality stuff. I see some people have air filters in their house and stuff for filtration, and it seems really, really good. Sorry, I had a cough. I apologize. Or that'd be an edit point.
No worries.
I was trying to get my word, but mold. But some of the symptoms, though, like different types of illness. You said depression. That's interesting. Cognitive ability, and what are some signs in the house? If we're going to look around the house today, and what are some of the signs that you would think about when I'm looking for mold?
Sure. So that's the first thing is, people always ask, how do I know if I have a mold problem, or what am I looking for? And it really comes down to if you see something, smell something, or feel something. So if you see something, that would be clearly any evidence of dampness, right? So that would be, condensation on windows, and any staining, leaks, any evidence of peeling or blistering paint where trim might be pulling away. Any evidence of dampness whatsoever. Clearly, liquid water is an issue. And the thing about seeing something is that if you see water, or if water event occurs, you have 24 to 48 hours to dry it thoroughly. Otherwise, it becomes a mold problem. Water damage is very cheap to fix. You rip it out, you dry it out. You wait 48 hours, it becomes a mold problem, very expensive, requiring professional assistance. You can save yourself. It's literally $0 to starting at, four figures and up. And so the bottom line is that if you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something. But most importantly, if there's any water event, you want to act very quickly. The other things that you want to look for are in terms of is odor. So if you smell something, the musty odor is pretty distinctive. Very few people can't identify that. I really do think it's an evolutionary line of code, because it's the first sign of decay, and it's something that is I think we're programmed to know that that's not a good smell, and in fact, in people who are sensitive, that can trigger an entire immune response. So some people can have asthma attacks just based upon exposure to the musty odor. But that musty odor is the byproduct of mold digesting. So that means basically these are mold farts. So the mold produces enzymes when the spores land on what it's going to grow on. The water comes in and given enough time, the spores will germinate like little seeds, and they send out these roots called hyphae, which release these enzymes to digest, just like we digest with digestive acids in our stomach. They do it on the outside, and in a brilliant way, by the way. They've got this entire library of enzymes. It's very simple single cells, and they, depending upon what they're on, they can digest pretty much anything they want. But there's a specific recipe, or a specific menu rather, that mold really likes to eat from, and that happens to be building materials in modern American homes. Sheetrock is like caviar. And so if you give it enough moisture is the only thing that you need to worry about with a mold problem in terms of prevention, because a mold problem is a moisture problem. And so see something, any evidence of moisture, smell something. If you have a musty odor, seek out the source of it, seek out the source of the moisture and fix that. And then lastly, if you feel something, when I say feel something, this is where it gets a little nebulous, because if you have any sort of upper respiratory, any sort of headaches, nausea, dizziness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, especially any of those symptoms that abate when you leave the building, you may want to get an inspection or have your house tested. Testing is a bit difficult, and getting an inspection done is a bit difficult. We could talk about that a little bit, because whether you choose to hire a professional or do it yourself test kit, or try to get a free inspection, can really change the outcome quite significantly.
Well, before we talk about the testing, getting the tests and stuff like that, is there any way to clean it? Is like bleach work, or does any chemicals and stuff that could help take care of the mold problem?
Well, so actually, this is a very common question, and it's actually one of the myths that I love to debunk. Bleach is the most common. It's the can't we just get a bucket of bleach and just wipe it off? Come on, mold schmold, right? This is what my grandfather would have done, and it's what but it's actually again one of those very counterintuitive things. Mold is caused by excess moisture, right? Mm-hmm. And so and by the way, mold likes to eat dead mold too. So mold remediation and mold cleanup, is that really about removing mold and removing the source of the moisture so that it doesn't proliferate? And because by removing the mold, you're also reducing exposure. But people love to use bleach because it does two things. It makes the surface look clean. It smells clean, and Americans are obsessed with the smell of what they call clean. Meanwhile, clean doesn't have an odor, by the way. If it has a scent, it's not clean. And so when you apply bleach to a mold problem, what you've done is made it invisible. You've actually bleached it, leaving behind dead mold, and also leaving behind a damp substrate, a damp material. And so bleach is 97% water and 3% sodium hypochlorite or chlorine. And so that evaporates very quickly, leaving behind water. And so you've just added water to a water problem. You just basically added gasoline to a fire. And so this is one of the most common things that people do, is they'll use a chemical that's water-based to kill mold, which doesn't need to be killed, that needs to be removed. And so one of the things that I advocate is a green clean, mold remediation, mold removal, unless you're cleaning a hard surface. Now there's an exception. So mold is not, all mold is not created equal in terms of how it grows. If you've got a porous surface like sheetrock, carpet padding, ceiling tiles, clothing, upholstered furniture, anything porous and absorptive or organic, if those things are affected by mold, they should be thrown away. Mm-hmm. If the remaining surfaces that are not water damage affected, mold affected, or where there's any sort of significant damage, can be cleaned, and they clean them using HEPA filtered vacuum cleaners to capture all of the dust so it doesn't redistribute it, and damp wipes without any chemicals. That's the way a proper remediation is done. Now, is it easy to find? Most contractors like to use chemicals because it's fast and that's what people expect. So they can go in there, charge a lot of money, do a lot less work, and ultimately people don't complain because that's what they expect. But a mold remediation is about removing the mold, cleaning the mess that was made by the mold, but most importantly, fixing the underlying water problem or moisture problem or humidity problem that caused it in the first place.
Was interesting too. I had to we get further in both the testing and stuff like that. It's like I like making pitchers of iced tea, cold water, and when it gets down, I leave in the refrigerator for a long time. Say I'm just drinking water, and I didn't get back to the iced tea for a couple of days, and I cleaned the pitcher. I had to throw the pitcher out, but all of a sudden I got mold inside the pitcher. Why does it build up like that? I was kind of curious.
Well, it's a lot like when you go to the lake,
Mhm.
and you sit on the shore, and you see how the beach kind of goes down into the shoreline goes down to the water, and as you go down, the further you go down, the organisms get sort of larger and larger and larger, right? But right at the edge where the water laps against the edge, you have incredible diversity of little creatures that are there that are just having a great time eating all the little stuff, and then the little bigger stuff eats those guys, and then it's like it's like that nursery rhyme, and so that we're at the edge where moisture meets the air. There's a remarkable amount of activity. It's like the ocean surface is where almost all the good stuff is happening, right? It's where all the plankton is generating oxygen. Literally half the world's oxygen is being generated by blue-green algae in the ocean. But all that photosynthesis, everyone thought for a long time it was just trees. And it was a big epiphany when they realized the oceans are breathing, exhaling oxygen. So anyway, the point is that right along where that iced tea comes up, you've got a shoreline there. And what really happens is that you've got organic molecules. What I mean by organic is tea particles, and they will accumulate right there at the edge, and they'll dry off, and that's the food. They're not eating; they're eating the dried little tea bits around the edge. It's like sediment around the periphery of the. It's actually fascinating. I mean, it's a strange thing, but I find mold and these kinds of things fascinating because whether you go telescopically or microscopically, the beauty of these things, if you can get past the revulsion or the aversion of this thing, because it's maybe it's not, it smells fun, but the incredible complexity of it all and the consistency of it. See, mold is a fact of life. You need to know how to deal with this stuff. It's up there with death and taxes. In fact, it's more reliable than death and taxes because we might overcome one of those one day. But we're not going to overcome mold. I can assure you of that.
I'm never looking at my picture of tea ever again the same. I'm gonna be looking at going another with this conversation.
There's lots of microbiological opportunities in your refrigerator, so don't get me started.
I'm just, oh man, I think I'm gonna get myself a metal iced tea pitcher now instead of a plastic one I've been using for a long time. It's interesting too about testing and stuff like that. Is it expensive to get testing for mold?
Yeah, it is, and it's and again, it's I'm in the mold business, but I always tell people if you can prevent this, or if you can act quickly enough that you can avoid having to deal with a mold problem. So, like I said, if you have a moisture issue or a water event, act quickly. You want to call and don't hesitate. Call the insurance company, get the people to come dry out the carpet and all that stuff as quickly as you can. But if you do not get to it in time, and you see something, or you smell something, or you feel something and you want to get checked out because it's a microscopic organism. I mean, the bottom line is you're not going to be able to do this with the naked eye. That's why we use microscopes in this business. And so you want to have your house tested for mold. You've got a spectrum of options. And on the low cost side, you've got the typical low quality things that you might find at the Home Depot checkout or Lowe's, where you've got these Petri dishes. They're called settling plates. They're scientifically invalid, but people buy them. They will always be positive. So you will get a good dose of fear and scientifically invalid data, but it will confirm that there is mold in the environment. Basically, you could do the same thing with a piece of damp white bread.
That's right? Interesting.
On the other side of the spectrum, you've got professionals. So you're going to charge $1,000 or more for a professional inspection, which includes taking air samples. Those air samples are analyzed by a third-party laboratory where they're looking for spore counts. In some cases, people are sampling for the odors and the VOs and the chemicals. But in any case, any reputable inspector who does not do remediation, this is a key piece. An independent inspector that does not have a conflict of interest that has to charge for an inspection. People love to get free inspections. Guess what? That's a sales call. That's not an inspection. If you want to have a proper inspection, you need to be prepared to pay for that. Right in the middle, there are a couple of products. One of those is ours, which uses the professional quality and the professional tools and devices. The Got Mold Test Kit uses exactly the same tools and devices the professionals use, but you don't get the professional. Air sampling using spore traps, and it does exactly what it sounds like. We capture spores in these cassettes, which get analyzed by a third-party laboratory. Our kits start at $149, allowing you to test up to 3 rooms. 1 room, $149, $199 for 2 rooms, and $249 for 3 rooms. And then once you have the kit, you can also keep the pump, and you can reorder supplies, so you can test again for a discount. And so the idea behind that is really not to replace a professional, because we're not in the business of trying to be all things to everybody, but really to offer a cost-effective first step. See, I started the mold inspection business, 1-800-GOT-MOLD, back 20 years ago, because I had this realization that mold inspection contractors were not, mold remediation contractors were not doing the right thing. And I wanted to help be the sort of, the advocate for consumers to help them navigate mold problems and kind of protect them from the contractors, quite frankly. But I realized my parents couldn't have afforded to hire my company. And so that always bothered me. And so the mold test kit for me, we created that because I realized we were unable to help the people who really needed this the most. The people who needed mold inspections couldn't afford them. We fielded tens of thousands of those calls over the last 20 years. And so Got Mold test kit is really designed to make indoor air quality something that's accessible to all people, so they can get the data they need to make better decisions about their air without it being budget busting.
Well, it's interesting, before I forget to ask, because I know that there was a dog involved. There's a dog that could actually, I thought that was really cool. There's a dog can sniff out mold. I know they have dogs that can do all kinds of things now, different with their nose, smell different things, like, all kinds of material. But mold, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So when I got back from Hawaii, I took a job. Keep in mind, I just left Wall Street, right? So I found out about a company that was in our area that was doing basement waterproofing and mold remediation, and I took a job there to learn from the ground up. And I remember them saying, "What was your last job?" And he just couldn't understand what I was doing there. And so anyway, I was there for a few months, and I saw behind the curtain and realized that, again, consumers are not being taken care of. And so when I started my inspection business, it was actually inspired by the discovery of mold detection dogs. These dogs were so inspiring to me because I had dogs as a kid, and they could find anything. And I found out about this guy who trained lots of different kinds of dogs, bomb dogs and drug dogs and cancer, epilepsy. He's really a fascinating guy, and he's got dogs for just about everything. And he had just trained the first mold dog, and I heard about this, and I flew down and I met him, and I brought the dog back up. Didn't even have a company yet. Oh, wow. But as soon as we got in, as soon as we got to town, I started offering free inspections to people who had been our basement waterproofing customers. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, Channel 6 Action News heard about it, and they sent out a truck to try to debunk us. And they hid mold in the house, and we found it in 3 minutes. And instead of debunking us, they endorsed us. And suddenly I had to set up a phone number and an LLC. The business kind of grew underneath me. And so Oreo is my mold dog. She and I did thousands and thousands of inspections together. The work that we did was what put us on Good Morning America, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Dr. Oz, hundreds of newspapers and magazines. She's in a few books on working dogs. She's in a college biology textbook. I mean, Oreo honestly was the mask. I played second fiddle to her. It was the best 12 years of my life before I had kids. Honestly, it was, and that actually, more than anything else, having a working dog taught me how to be a good dad.
Okay,
truly,
that makes sense, because
you learn the discipline. You learn what you learn how to develop that. You realize that dogs, like little kids, if you establish boundaries and you stay strong on them, they'll respect you. If you're wishy-washy, they won't. Dogs know how to sniff out the sucker. So do little kids. And you give them an inch and they'll take a mile. I mean, there's just you have to be super consistent with kids. They thrive in an environment where they know where the boundaries are and they know that you've got their back. And dogs are the same way. We're pack animals, and dogs do this thing so instinctively. They want to be by your side, just like little kids do. And if you give them that foundational, if you're the alpha, but that loving, compassionate alpha, boy, you've got a loyal mate, But the moment you're wishy-washy, boy, that creates a sense of doubt that I think has a huge impact on kids, and for sure it loses the respect of our four-legged friends. But anyway, that was one of the best experiences of my life, and we did a lot of really great work. Thank you for bringing that up, Joe.
Well, I was kind of curious. Well, can you any stories that you guys were on some kind of visits with an inspection for mold or hunting for mold? Any stories you can share?
Sure. I mean, I have so many stories. One of the things about our process was that we would show up, and I'd sit down at the kitchen table with the customer before we'd had a phone call or they'd have spoken with someone at the office. And so we'd have some background, but then I'd sit at the table and people would always say, "Where's your dog? Where's your dog?" And she's in the truck and, she's resting. And so we'd leave the truck with heat and air conditioning for her, depending upon the season. And people always wanted us to just like show up at the front door with the dog. And that's not what we did. Instead, what we would do is do this fact finding. And then we'd go upstairs, go do an inspection in a very methodical way. We'd start in the basement and we'd go all the way up in a clockwise manner. And I'd be taking, notes and all this, making note of all the observations and potential recommendations. And then while I'm doing this, also looking for areas where there might be a hazard that we'd have to either, exclude from the inspection that area, or we'd have to rectify so we can proceed safely. And then I go in and I put all the tools away and I go get the dog, go get Oreo. And we go back to the house and we go to the basement and we work our way up in a clockwise fashion. It was very fast. Oreo could do a 5,000 square foot house in like under 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, every single nook and cranny, right? She was a pro. But we always had the same pattern, and we would go straight down to the basement and we'd go to the furthest corner and we'd do this pattern. And that way we knew we'd covered the bases, right? So this one particular house, we walk up and after I'd put the tools away, I walk up with her and ready to go. And they open up the door and she takes me for a beeline straight up the stairs. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're going to break protocol here. And so this is the first time she had done that. And she took me all the way through, and it was a beeline right back to the master bedroom. And then through a closet with a whole bunch of boxes in it, and she weaves into the back and she moves a bunch of stuff out of the way, and she sits with all these jackets and all these clothes over her. You can't even see her; she's completely hidden by all the clothes, and she's alerting on the wall. And the way she alerted was that it was a passive alert. They wouldn't scratch the wall; she would touch it with her nose. So oftentimes she would leave a little wet spot, which is where we would mark with a sticker. We literally put a sticker right where the wet spot was, and we would drill holes to inspect what was there. We'd take an air sample out. So anyway, in this particular case, then she pulls away and she takes me down the stairs all the way to the basement and starts where we normally start. And then we went all the way back up, and she alerted again in the same spot because she got paid with a food treat every single time. So she was not too proud to ask for a treat twice for the same alert. and then we'd finish, and then she'd say, "We're done." And then she would take me to the front door. And that was what we did. She knew her job, right? But what was amazing about this time was that she knew that and I went back and we tested all these areas, and lo and behold, the biggest mold problem that house had, in fact, it was the mold problem of that house, was hidden in an area behind those clothes in the back of that closet, in an area completely inaccessible any other way. There was no way I would have ever seen that. There was no way I would have ever detected that. And it was right behind that woman's bed. And she was sleeping in it, and she was sick. And when that was remediated finally, the woman got better, the whole family healed. I mean, it's just really, these kinds of stories were not uncommon. The point is that Oreo was the only tool I've ever used that actually learned. And that she took over, a leadership position in that. She said, "No, this is where you need to look." She knew her job. She knew what she was there for. And that was so inspiring. And so we had this, it was just really, you saw something come out. I've had a lot of dogs, but when you work with a dog and a dog has a job, they take pride. It's a relationship that I encourage anybody who likes animals to consider. You will never regret it.
It was just fun. I was curious because you hear about all kinds of working dogs, and that's awesome. I mean, I'm glad that in the relationship they say dogs are man's best friends. I've never had a dog, but I know people who have dogs, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, dogs are my favorite people.
They're always loving, and no matter what, and if you're mad at them, they still look at you and they give me some lovins, pat me on the head.
They're so consistent. We could learn a lot about dogs. Learn a lot about how to be better humans through dogs. I have a sticker that I stumbled across the other day, and it said, you should be the person that your dog thinks you are.
That's awesome.
Try to be the person that your dog thinks you are. Yeah.
Well, wrapping up, final thoughts about anything about mold, and something about anything you want to leave with?
Listen, I think one of the ideas that I try to leave people with is we tend to look at the buildings that we live and work in as these boxes that we store our stuff in, that we move between, and there's these structures. And if you really look at it, the buildings that we live and work in are actually an extension of our immune system. It's an exoskin or an exoskeleton. In fact, I mean, think about it. Shelter is one of the 4 basic human needs. And within shelter, you've also got air. So it's actually 2 out of the 4, if you think about it. So, but this is something I bring that to your attention, and it's a surprise to you. I can see the look on your face because it's something you just haven't looked at. And the reason that's the case is because, like most things that we're so close to, like relationships in some cases, the things that we're closest to are the things we most take for granted. But air, the rules of 3 in the military, right? You can go 3 minutes without air. What is it? 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food. And you look at this, but people forget about that 3 minutes without air. And so we're very far-sighted as a species. We tend to worry about the problems in the other area. We're not looking at the biggest threat to your health is hiding right underneath your nose. And the building that you're in is actually supposed to support your health. And if there's something wrong with your building and it's impacting your health, the interesting part about this is that you have a relationship with that building where if the building develops aches and pains, think about it like an organism, and it starts to develop mold, the signal that you're getting, much like inflammation in the body, that there's something wrong in the building, is the musty smell, is the mold. And so when that building gets sick, you get sick. And then when the building gets better, you get better. You actually have a symbiotic relationship with your building. This is not a static box where we live in. This is a relationship like a hermit crab has a shell. You wouldn't be able to survive without it. And yet I try to bring attention to this potential, a new form of relationship, a new awareness about that relationship. You turn your house into your home because your home is your health. That's what I want to leave people with. And it's one of the few things you can do in this world where you have real control. We have very little control over our lives if you're honest with yourself. But when it comes to your indoor air quality, it's the greatest gift you can give your family is to learn more about that and do the things you need to do, which means if you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something, get yourself good air purifiers, HEPA filtered air cleaners, put them everywhere. And if you want, we put a welcome page for all of your listeners at gotmold.com /no sidelines dads. Okay.
I'll be in the show. I'll make sure that link's in the show notes.
And what we'll do there for your listeners is we've got a 10% coupon code there for mold test kits through gotmold.com, and also a free ebook. It's a 45-page ebook that's filled with inspection checklists and a lot of the things that we just talked about today in terms of things to look out for, things to be aware of, as well as resources in terms of air purifiers and the other kinds of equipment that you could take a look at. We don't sell those things. We're agnostic. What we're more concerned about is that people just think about these things a little bit differently and then take action when they see a problem.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you much for the link from the show notes, and also thank you much for being on the podcast today. You gave me a new perspective about my place where I live. I never really thought of that. I take it for granted, and I really do. I really appreciate the new perspective. That's the word I'm looking for. I really appreciate your time, Jason. Thank you. All links will be in the show notes for this episode. I really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Joe.